Is Tron actually good? I saw it last night in IMAX and I've got a lot to say. I think it's interesting to look at Tron because there's a huge divide between the critical reception of this film and the wider audience reception. On Rotten Tomatoes, I think at the moment of recording this, it's about 87% for the audience score and then like about 57% for the critics. There's a huge disparity there. I want to have a look at that because obviously it's the third film in a franchise, so there's a bit of history to it that I want to dive into. But before we get to all of that, please consider subscribing because I'm going to be doing videos every week about filmmaking with fresh takes and why I love filmmaking. But anyways, let's jump into it. For those who don't know, the Tron franchise started in 1982 with the film Tron. Now, at the time, CGI was pretty fresh and this film was a huge milestone as it was one of the few films at the time to really use extensive computer animation for the film. And at the time of the release, obviously I wasn't alive, but my understanding is that it was a pretty groundbreaking film for its visuals, and although the story was a bit thin and a bit lackluster, I think it captured audiences' imaginations, and I can only begin to imagine what it was like for a 1982 audience to see computer-generated images like those of Tron. And for those who don't know too much about the story of Tron, it's very simple. I mean, I've only seen it once, and I'm not gonna lie, it didn't do it for me, and it's been probably 5 years since I watched it, so my memory of it's a little hazy, but the basic premise is Jeff Bridges' character, Kevin Flynn, is a programmer who gets accidentally, I don't know if it's accidental, but gets sucked into the grid, which is basically this depiction of a computer with lots of different programs embodied by beings. He basically needs to defeat this tyrannical leader or something. Yeah, like I said, story, a little bit thin, not super memorable. I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but sorry guys. Now, fast forward 28 years later, and the long-awaited sequel, Tron Legacy, comes out in 2010 with a pretty lukewarm reception, both critically and financially. But for me, this is where the story of Tron gets kind of interesting. Tron Legacy is set decades after the first one and follows Kevin Flynn's son, Sam, after the disappearance of Kevin Flynn, decades prior. As an adult, Sam receives a page from his father's old office, and when he goes to explore, he, like his dad before him, gets sucked into the grid. But this time, the game has changed. Visual effects and CGI improved exponentially between the first and second film, so Legacy's depiction of the grid is breathtaking to say the least. For the director Joseph Kosinski, Tron Legacy was actually his debut feature film, and he would actually go on to have huge success critically and financially with films like Top Gun Maverick and F1. He depicted the world of the grid in a tangible, grounded way that audiences in 1982 could only dream of. It feels dark, sterile, and perfectly constructed, which aligns perfectly with one of the central themes of the film, which is the pursuit of perfection. Where this film really excels is the production design, sound design, framing, cinematography, lighting, direction, and of course, the music by Daft Punk, which honestly I believe is one of the best soundtracks probably in the 21st century, at the very least. While this film excels at the technical side, it doesn't reach the same heights narratively. Some themes and ideas feel a little bit undercooked and are often conveyed in a pretty hamstrung way. There's points where it feels like it's close to saying something profound about the human condition, and then Jeff Bridges comes along and just says,
"Biodigital jazz, man."
But here's the interesting thing about the Tron films. They keep making them despite the lukewarm reception. And why is that? Well, honestly, I think the reason is that they're just simply kids' films. They don't have to have the same level of storytelling that other sci-fi films like the Blade Runner films have. Instead, they capture the imagination of kids at the time with technically groundbreaking and masterful filmmaking. That happened to me. I saw Tron Legacy as a kid when it came out and I loved it. It felt like the perfect stepping stone from a kid's film to more adult and auteur filmmaking like the Blade Runner films. It took itself and its filmmaking seriously, which left a profound impact on me that is actually hard to put into words. but it's safe to say that I was definitely inspired. And of course, I have so many memories around the film. I remember in a toy store there were the Tron discs. I kept thinking about getting one. I was always dreaming about it. I was going to save up money and get it, but I never did, and that is definitely my biggest regret from childhood. Also, I remember seeing it in IMAX Melbourne. Obviously, that's one of the biggest screens in the world. And I remember vividly in a conversation scenes, noticing the entire audience's heads just rotating from left to right each time there was a cut in the conversation. But anyways, with all of that history out of the way, let's talk about Tron Ares. Now, of course, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or the Letophant.
It's Morbin time.
The film's lead, Jared Leto, has been attached to this film for years. And I think when it was announced the film was actually finally going into production with him leading in it, I think it's safe to say that people were apprehensive. And of course, not ignoring the fact that this film seemingly wasn't going to have any of the characters introduced in Tron Legacy. But in terms of Jared, it's safe to say that the last 10 years haven't been his best.
Never confuse shit with cioccolato.
And of course, he's had some pretty sus conduct recently.
Honka honka!
I don't want to get into that stuff too much, but I think it's important to acknowledge how casting him as the lead did dampen the hype for this film quite a bit. But when the first teaser for Ares came out, most of the comments were people just being nostalgic about Tron Legacy and how much they actually loved watching that film when it came out, which again illustrates the profound effect it had on kids who watched it growing up. So last night I saw Tron Ares in IMAX, and was it good? Yeah, it was alright. Like, it was good. It was fine. Tron Ares follows a new program called Ares, who's sent on a mission to find this thing called the Permanence Code, because when programs are brought into the real world, they can only last 29 minutes. So he's sent after a new character called Eve Kim, portrayed by Greta Lee, who has the Permanence Code. The 29-minute time limit is actually a pretty good plot device. It adds a lot of tension and urgency to Ares and his mission. Like I said, none of the characters introduced in Tron Legacy are actually in Ares, and so Tron Ares kind of acts like a reset for the franchise. And unfortunately, that means this film has to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of introducing a whole new set of characters. Most of them are pretty bland, undercooked, and underdeveloped. I like the broad strokes of Ares' journey in becoming empathetic, compassionate, and learning what it means to be real and to have emotions. But the film really struggles to give the other characters any compelling motives, like the Dillingers, who seemingly just want to have corporate dominance over the tech industry, and particularly AI, with no relatable depth or nuance. Eve's character is a little bit more relatable in that we experience what it'd be like for programs to come into our world firsthand through her eyes, which is pretty tense. Especially the light cycle cat and mouse chase scene when Ares and Athena are in search of Eve and are trying to track her down and get the Permanence Code off her. And this sequence is gripping and has some amazing shots. There are some really cool bird's eye view shots of light cycles going through the streets and turning corners with the red light trailing behind them. But Eve's character doesn't have too much else going for her, and the film attempts to make you care about her with some really forced exposition about her sister dying from cancer, and her search for the Permanence Code is a way of her reconnecting with her sister, who was also in search of this for the betterment of humanity. But this backstory is brushed over way too quickly in the first half hour. And in fact, this first half hour is clogged with exposition. Interestingly, the first half hour of Ares actually has very similar beats to Tron Legacy, namely the opening monologue delivered by Jeff Bridges on the grid, a bunch of exposition dump news headlines sort of keep catching the audience up to speed, and even the title sequence is really reminiscent of Legacy's, with this rotating shot pushing into the title and then rotating 90 degrees and going through the O. It's very Tron Legacy. Here lies the issue with Ares. Even though it's not directly continuing the story of Tron Legacy, it knows how well Tron Legacy works, and so it's repeating a lot of the same beats While Legacy wasn't perfect narratively, Sam did have a much better establishment as a character, as in one of the opening scenes you see him connecting with his dad, and so we get a sense of what his relationship with Kevin Flynn was like before he disappeared. And if Ares continued the story of Sam and Cora from Legacy, then he wouldn't have had so much work to do establishing characters. Now I'm going to get into spoilers for Tron Ares, so if you haven't already watched it, then you better stop watching it now. In the final act, Eve sends Ares into the 1982 version of the grid in order to recover Kevin Flynn's permanence code. And of course, the retro look is really cool, but then Kevin is just hanging out there. It's not really fully explained, he's just hanging out. I don't know, maybe I missed it, but it kind of just got brushed aside. And I think Jared Leto said that he just wanted the 1982 version of the grid to be in the film, and so it seems like they kind of just shoehorned it in for Jared Leto's own nostalgia. So yeah, that's great. They chat a bit and reflect a little bit on what's going on, and then Kevin susses Ares and then decides to give him the permanence code because he's showing emotions, and then he says the permanence code should have been called the impermanent code. It's like obvious what the film is going for, which is that to be real is to be impermanent and to accept one's own mortality. That's a good message, that's a good thing to explore, but it's kind of just hitting you over the head with that line of dialogue from Kevin. It's not really exploring it further, whether that's like visually or thematically, it's just kind of there. And of course that does contrast the experience of the programs in this film, as they only have 29 minutes to spend in the real world at any one time before they de-res. I think it would have been cool if they had some kind of consequence for the programs being brought back again and again. Maybe each time they get brought back, they're a little bit more corrupted. Kind of like in Game of Thrones, the Lord of Light guy who keeps getting brought back to life says that like every time he's brought back, it's like a little bit of him is left behind and he's not quite whole anymore. And I think that would have added probably more depth to the programs. With the theme of permanence and impermanence and the code, I think there was such a huge missed opportunity for this to be linked to Cora and her characters who's set up in Tron Legacy. Imagine if the permanence code was actually in her, because after all, when she makes it into the real world in Tron Legacy, we presume it's fine, she's permanent, she can stay there. And why would that be? Well, it's obvious, she's an ISO, so that means she's a naturally forming program who wasn't created by a user or a human. And in Tron Legacy, Kevin Flynn talks about how the ISOs were going to change everything about life on Earth, whether it's like science, medicine, religion, etc., and by a digital jazz man. And that was like promised in Tron Legacy, and of course Tron Legacy didn't get a chance to explore that, but I think this is what it could have been, because when Eve is using the permanence code, she's using it to create an orange tree, which is food, and it can create food, medicine, things to better humanity. And of course there's a contrast where Dillinger himself wants to use it to create weapons and AI weapons. But then of course, where does the conflict come in? And I think you could have scrapped Eve's character and replaced her with Sam. And maybe he himself hasn't used the permanence code in the last 15 years because maybe to strip it from Cora would result in her death. And of course he doesn't want to do that because there was a romance going there or something. And this would have given Sam another arc. He's lost his dad already. Is he prepared to lose another loved one? And maybe eventually Cora does die for whatever reason, and the permanence code does get extracted and it gives life to Ares, but then maybe this is Ares' face-to-face realization that to be real is to be mortal and to be impermanent, and he would have to see and experience for himself grief firsthand. You still could have had this film start off from the point of view of Ares and sort of have a similar structure where he's tracking down Sam and Cora, and then obviously begins to defy the directives of the Dillingers. I think also you could have had Cillian Murphy's Dillinger character from Tron Legacy instead of Evan Peters. And maybe after the events of Tron Legacy, Cillian Murphy's Dillinger character was actually kicked out of NCOM. That was done by Sam after he took back control of the company, and maybe for whatever reason he feels kind of like backstabbed by him, and so he wants to get revenge, and maybe that motivates his pursuit of the permanence code and his obsession with dominating the AI tech world. Maybe this would have sucked, but I don't know, I just can't help but wonder what would have been if we did have a direct Legacy sequel. But then again, maybe I'm asking too much from a Disney film that is just made to have widest appeal possible, including for kids. And that's what Tron films have always been, but obviously with some amazing technical achievements. And Tron Ares is not nearly as big of a leap forward for visual effects all filmmaking in the same way that the first two films were, but it does look great. It successfully brings the grid to the real world with some gripping light cycle chases through a real city, and then some terrifying POV shots of recognizers flying through the city and just causing absolute chaos and collateral damage. That stuff is worth seeing on the big screen. I think if I saw this film as a kid, I would have loved it in the same way that I love Legacy now. So although all the critics are shitting all over it at the moment and saying that it's total garbage, I do wonder what people are going to think of it in 10 or 20 years time, and whether people will appreciate it a little bit more like they do Legacy more retrospectively, for a lot of the reasons that I've been highlighting in this video. I think Tron Ares is definitely a step below Tron Legacy, but I think it does continue the tradition well enough of some really cool action scenes that are filmed as practically as possible with real sets, real costume, real lighting, and in real locations. It's mind-numbing action, but you can't fault good action, and I feel like after looking at the audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, I definitely think people will agree with me on that one. Should you watch this film? I definitely recommend it for any Tron fans, sci-fi, cyberpunk, and just action fans, because it's really well directed. It's got some amazing visuals and a great soundtrack by Nine Inch Nails, which is pretty on point. I was definitely the nodding cat for a lot of that. But if you don't tick any of those boxes, then this film is probably not for you, and that's totally okay. Well, have you seen Tron Ares? What did you think? Did you hate it, dislike it? Were you kind of lukewarm about it like all the other films? How do you think it compares to the first two films? Please comment and like and subscribe, because I'm doing videos every week. I swear this time, maybe. And I'll see you next time.